On Christmas Eve, I took my girlfriend to a Catholic mass in the area, just because she had never been to a religious service before and kind of wanted to see what they're like. So we went. And it was okay. Our music is better, and the sermon was kind of like rambling and incoherent, and I really wasn't quite sure what the guy was getting at. And then I was looking over my notes this morning before I came here, and I thought, this message is kind of rambling and incoherent. Apologies in advance, but it's the holidays, I've been busy. But the dorm where I lived when I was an undergraduate at the University of Michigan had these like 12 by 12 foot rooms. They were like cubicles, or cells, I guess. And in order to maximize living area, we would build these lofts, where these wood frames bolted to the walls and elevate the bed, so you could have, this vast 144 square foot living space below the beds. And one night, it was during the holidays, and that's why I've been thinking about this. Right before Christmas break, one of our classmates received a phone call in the middle of the night. And again, this is the time before cell phones, and so there's one phone on a wall, if you can picture that, some of you. Getting down out of his loft bed to answer the phone, he slipped and fell and broke his leg in the process. And the break was pretty bad. And at the hospital, they gave him the option of just putting it in a cast and letting it heal kind of that way, but it would take longer, and he'd probably have to kind of drop out for a semester because it was a bad break, or have surgery. And so he and his parents opted for surgery, and they did the surgery. However, after the surgery, there's some complications, and within a couple days, he was dead. Yeah, he died. And then the phone call he jumped out of the bed to answer in the first place was a wrong number. And, it just seemed so strange and so surreal that you could have this healthy, smart, talented young person with a great future ahead, and then bam, with no warning, it's all over. Just like that. How could it happen? It seems so senseless, so unfair, and just, like I said, so random. Jumping out of the bed in the middle of the night over a wrong phone call. And then I've also thought about how, if that same type of thing happened today, it might turn out differently because, you wouldn't have your phone on the wall, you'd have your phone next to your bed, maybe a cell phone. If it was a wrong number, you'd see on the caller ID that it was a number you didn't recognize, you probably wouldn't answer it anyway, or you turn off the phone or whatever. And it was just this kind of confluence of factors that came together in a way that made something tragic and unexpected happen. And so I'm sorry to start out with a bummer. We're going to do the bummer stories first, and we're going to get better. But I think part of being a humanist is that we look at all aspects of human life, and as we know, human life isn't always swell and wonderful. There's tough things to deal with, and we got to talk about that too. And so 8 years after college, I entered a profession which put me in proximity to death on a fairly regular basis, since I was officiating at funerals and sitting by people as they passed away. And over time, this really started to take a toll on me. And I'd be willing to bet that anybody that's in a field like that, where maybe you're a hospice nurse or something like that, maybe you're physician, EMT, whatever, you probably have some post-traumatic stress disorder going on in your life. Because I know that it took a toll on me over the years, for sure. And but it would just, more and more, you would run into these senseless random deaths, like the guy in the college dorm. One particularly difficult loss was a 19-year-old young man who had been active in John knew him, who had been active in our youth group. This was a delightful young person. And he went off to college, and he's just one of these guys that always brightened up the room. And one night, he and some friends were on the way back from Houston. They were hit head-on by a drunk driver on 290 who swerved into their lane. And there again, he's gone at 19. Just like that, in a blink of an eye. And so after officiating more funerals like this, strange illnesses, accidents, suicides, random infections, it was becoming increasingly hard for me to envision any kind of a grand scheme to all of this. Or that there was an all-knowing or benevolent being behind it. If anything, it made me wonder if there's some kind of evil god in charge. Because it seemed like all the great people were getting snatched away, and the kind of yucky people were surviving and thriving just fine. In fact, the Japanese have a proverb for this, which is "Kiraware mono yoni habakaru," which translates as kind of nasty people have a habit of sticking around the world for a while. It's a commonly used, I guess it's the reverse of only the good die young, you know. But it's interesting that they have that concept too. Now, of course, searching for meaning behind senseless suffering has been a quest of human philosophy and religion and literature since humans have existed. I called the title of the talk today "The Reason Why." It was a reference to Alfred Lord Tennyson's poem "The Charge of the Light Brigade," which was about one of the most infamous military disasters in British history, a senseless charge, kind of like Pickett's charge, but worse, that led soldiers senselessly to their deaths. And you'll remember, if you studied the poem in high school, one of the stanzas goes, "Theirs not to make reply, theirs not to reason why, theirs but to do and die. Into the valley of death rode the 600. And it's a powerful poem. And you know, for Tennyson, ultimately, there was no reason why. I mean, when you read through the poem, it's like, there's no reason for this senseless slaughter. There was no reason why. And a similar vein, Kurt Vonnegut wrote in Slaughterhouse-Five, based on his experiences as an American POW during the Second World War, who actually survived the firebombing of Dresden, Germany, which was the largest mass killing in European history up to that point. And he survived it because the POWs, his group of POWs, were put down in an underground meat locker, hence the title of the book. And then after the bombing, they emerged from the meat locker and, you know, were used as labor to help search for survivors and corpses and bury the dead. And the fact that Vonnegut, like, mentally survived that is just, you know, unbelievable. Of course, he smoked 3 packs of cigarettes the rest of his life after that, and that's probably something. I mean, can you imagine that kind of mental trauma, going through something like that? Anyway, the main character of the book is, which probably most of you read, is an American GI named Billy Pilgrim. And the story goes back and forth between Pilgrim's experience of the war and his life after the war as an optometrist in the Midwest, and then his fixation on science fiction, and he believes he's been captured by a spaceman from a planet called Tralfamadore. And when he's taken up into the spaceship, and I'm going to quote from the book, the Tralfamadorians greet him and say, "Welcome aboard, Mr. Pilgrim. Any questions?" Billy licked his lips, thought for a while, inquired at last, "Why me?" That is a very earthling question to ask, Mr. Pilgrim. Why you? Why us, for that matter? Why anything? Because this moment simply is. Have you ever seen bugs trapped in amber? Yes. Billy, in fact, had a paperweight in his office, which was a blob of polished amber with 3 ladybugs embedded in it. Well, here we are, Mr. Pilgrim, trapped in the amber of this moment. There is no why. And maybe that's the answer to the age-old question, the reason why. There is no why. This moment just is, as Lou showed us in the Winnie the Pooh slide, today is my favorite day. We are in the amber of this moment. And actually, it sounds like a bummer, but I think it's not. I think it's really good news on several levels. Because if there is no why, or at least not one that we can discern, then we're freed from the need to constantly search for it and rack our little brains over, well, you know, why do these things happen to wonderful people that don't deserve these horrible things that happen to them? You keep doing that for a while, it's an exercise in futility and possibly a recipe for insanity. The international news headlines this holiday season have been filled with, you know, the standard litany of tragedies that we're used to seeing. Only I think it's worse in some ways, because now they're saying like 100,000 people are dead in Syria now, in this civil war that just drags on, and we see pictures of dead children all the time. Hundreds of thousands of refugees living in camps now. Looks like South Sudan is on the verge of civil war, just after emerging from a horrific civil war with Sudan a few years ago. And there have been atrocities there in recent weeks. The folks in the Philippines are still putting the pieces back together after the devastating Hurricane Haiyan. And it's all kind of overwhelming to contemplate. And against this backdrop of massive global suffering, I went to the gym for my morning workout on December 26th, the day after Christmas. And the lead story on every single news channel, because they have all the TVs lined up at the gym, every single news channel was the failure of UPS and FedEx to deliver everybody's Christmas gifts on time. Oh, the humanity. Pundits were pontificating. Logistics experts were weighing in with their expert advice about this awful problem. And the news people wanted to know, and when will the gifts get there? And Fox News blamed it on Obamacare. I read somewhere the other day that the average American household has more stuff, this volume of material goods than the households of any society or culture that has ever existed in the history of humanity. And America was upset that even more stuff didn't arrive by December 25th. And I think here again, getting back to the things that Lou showed us, it's a lot of life is about perspective, isn't it? And how we lose perspective. And there's a lot of reasons we can get into that. We could talk about the availability heuristic and stuff like that. But I started imagining, alternate news coverage of this event. Why didn't the news people start? And we know why. They're not trying to give us the news. They're trying to sell a product. They're trying to get you to watch their commercials. So they'll go with anything they think grabs your attention. It's not about getting any kind of sane, rational perspective on the world. But if we lived in the sane world and put things in their proper perspective, maybe the news people would have led with how, well, the people in the Philippines, despite having everything kind of washed out to sea by the typhoon, are still finding ways to celebrate the holidays. I read a little story about that, and they're trying to make life come back to normal. And then maybe 3 or 4 items down, they might have a little side mention about the package delivery fiasco, and then they could say, well, but you remember the Grinch, and you can have happy holidays even without boxes and ribbons and bags. And one of my favorite bumper stickers of all time says simply this: remember, only 1/7 billionth of this is about you. It's a very good one, and it's a reminder I need, because we all get sucked into the vortex of our lives and our dilemmas and all, it's true. Something like 2 billion people in the world live on less than $2 a day. Hundreds of millions of people are constantly malnourished. I read the other day hundreds of millions of people in India will never have the benefit of indoor plumbing, ever. Something we just take for granted. I also read this: the electricity generated in all of sub-Saharan Africa, excluding South Africa, but sub-Saharan Africa down to South Africa, on that entire huge section of the continent, the entire amount of electricity generated is equivalent to the electricity generated in the state of Arizona.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. And here we are, to quote Vonnegut, trapped in the amber of this moment. And for us, it's a very good moment, and we need to remember that. We need to cultivate that sense of wonder and awe and gratefulness. And we're in a climate-controlled room, we have beautiful music, we have coffee. Whether it's good or not is a matter of debate, apparently. We're surrounded by wonderful people. We're anticipating a nice lunch together. Today is my favorite day. Life doesn't get much better than this. At times it does get better, but not by much. Keeping our lives in proper context and maintaining a realistic perspective on our place in the world, we can only reach one conclusion, that for all intents and purposes, we have won the lottery. Literally. Why you? Why us, for that matter? Why anything? Because this moment simply is. And I'm going to try very hard this year to take the advice of the spaceman from Trafalgar, and I'm going to spend more time appreciating the isness of this moment every day. You remember Irma Bombeck?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, that's a wonderful syndicated columnist, humorist mostly. Her columns are in papers all over the country.
The grass grows greener over the septic tank.
Yes, she wrote a book called The Grass Grows Greener Over the Septic Tank, yes. One of her most famous columns was not a humor column, and you can look it up, because it's just Google "if I had my life to live over," and I don't have time to read you the whole column, but this is part of it. It's a column she wrote after she was diagnosed with cancer, and it was entitled "If I Had My Life to Live Over Again," and here's part of it. I would have invited friends over to dinner, even if the carpet was stained and the sofa faded. I would have sat on the lawn with my children and not worried about grass stains. I would never have bought anything just because it was practical, wouldn't show soil, or was guaranteed to last a lifetime. When my child kissed me impetuously, I would never have said, "Later, now get washed up for dinner." There would have been more "I love yous," more "I'm sorries," but mostly, given another shot at life, I would seize every minute, look at it, and really live it, and never give it back. How are we doing for time? I'm going to ramble a little more, since you're not too restless yet. I was going to end there. But then I ran across this quote yesterday from Steven Pinker, who's like one of my favorite scientists, thinking guys. And he's, and this was, apparently he's been nominated for some essay award this year, and this is an essay he wrote this year, which is one, "The facts of science, by exposing the absence of purpose in the laws governing the universe, force us to take responsibility for the welfare of ourselves, our species, and our planet." I love that. It's up to us to make the meaning. It's not going to drop down magically. And we have that opportunity every minute to create meaning, to make the world a better place, like you said, for ourselves, for our species, and our planet. I had a neat experience a couple weeks ago. Some of us were gathered over at Ventropolis, the wine bar, and I went up to the bar to settle my tab, and I was talking to the wine guy, Trevor, who some of you guys know, and we've been meeting over there enough that he knows us, he's interested in what we're doing, and he's, liked us on Facebook and all that. So he's, and he can't get here because he works so late, but so we were talking about what Oasis does. And then there's a woman sitting there at the bar, it turned out to be a Spanish teacher grading papers, and she overheard me talking to Trevor, and she said, "Well, what are you guys talking about? That sounds really cool." And so I explained what we do, and she says, "I've been looking for something like that, for a community of people that just want to get together and make the world a better place." And she wanted all of our info, and got a card and stuff, and then the guy down next to her said the very same thing. And I sat and chatted with him for like 5 minutes. He was asking all kinds of questions. And here's the deal: is that to me it's just interesting that I wasn't like out there, evangelizing for Houston Oasis. But it came up naturally that people resonate with this concept of a place that's not driven by dogma, but simply out of humanistic values. Now, they haven't shown up yet, but see, that doesn't matter. And here's the deal about showing up. When you get those this is the way these conversations are so important. I have a buddy of mine who's in the insurance industry, and he has told me many times over the years that someone will, he'll make a sales contact with someone, initial inquiry with someone, And then he will sometimes not hear from them for like 3, 4, even 5 years. He will get a call from someone that he hadn't spoken to for 5 years. It sounded like a European siren. It was kind of weird. Okay, are they lost? Anyway, what he said is not infrequent that he would get someone inquiring about purchasing an insurance policy 5 years after he talked to him, no contact. And we're not selling insurance, obviously, but it's making those connections and telling the story, and I think people want to know and they're interested. And so, can you imagine the ripple effect that happens as all of us have these conversations all over? It could be tremendous, and it would do a lot to make the world a better place. So that's my rambling, incoherent reflections for the day. Thanks for listening.